over to you, Fiona. We will give you enough time. You see the timer there, and in the Q&A we can see. Okay.
We just need our last panelist on the screen, please.
It is on?
Oh, there he is. Yes. Yeah. Welcome. Yes. Thank you, Bernard.
Sorry. All sorted.
Okay. Morning, everybody. Very hard act to follow, that one. I'm sorry I invited him now. Topic for today, steering the mining ship, the view from the bridge. And we are extremely pleased to have only chairman on this panel. Oh, well, we could have had a chairwoman, but chairman. So welcoming Guy Robert from Paris. He had all sorts of logistical problems to get here, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Chairman of Gecamines, the DRC state-owned mining company. Venkat, well known to most of you, now chair of Endeavour. Dominic, chairman of Rio Tinto, and Kalidas, chairman of Glencore. So the title of today's discussion, in my mind, conjures up a rather glamorous image of the admiral of a large frigate, standing smartly upright, totally in charge, his binoculars sweeping the horizon for threats and opportunities, with the crew safe in the knowledge that he or she will steer them through safely and hopefully victorious. Today's reality for a chairman of a mining company, however, is that you need to be aware of not only what's ahead, but the torpedoes that could come from under the water, the pirates that could scramble on board with guns, and unmanned drones appearing from any and every possible direction. Oh, and more extreme weather conditions. So bang goes the Hollywood image. Welcome to reality. We have an enormous depth of experience and strategic vision today, and we hope they'll be straight talking and tell us really what occupies their mind on that lonely night watch on the bridge. And in my brief conversations with them ahead of this panel, it emerged that one of the biggest concerns is growth. Understandable in an industry where diminishing mineral assets have to be replaced on a constant basis, and now complicated by the geopolitical storms that Mark Sedwell outlined. So I'd like to start with Kalidas to comment on the challenges of growth in general, and more specifically how Glencore's trading arm is adapting to the shifting sands of trade wars and tariffs.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here, plus the colleagues of mine sitting here who I've known well. I think from Glencore's perspective, we're two big businesses in essence. We have the industrial side and we have the trading side. The trading side has the innate ability to anticipate what's happening in the markets, react to changes very quickly, and from a strategic growth point of view, that makes us extremely adaptable. So if you think about two kinds of business models. Many companies take Shell in the 1960s and 70s. They had these long-term Shell vision plans where they gamed 30 years, 40 years out what happens, and then they built a strategic plan around that. Our industrial side looks at it that way. Our trading side, on the other side, looks at it from what's happening today, how are markets changing, how can we take advantage of the volatility, and what's happening on a day-to-day basis that we can be in a better position to trade. And the combination of the two is far greater than the sum of the parts. So I'd like to say, we take 2 and 2 and try to make 22 out of it.
Thank you, Dominic. Mark touched on an issue of being a very big, diverse multinational, and life has got a lot tougher in managing your way through that. Can you comment, Rio in particular, with its allegiance and involvement with China, and how you are going to steer your way through this new world?
Yeah, there were a number of things that Mark mentioned that resonated. I think one is with all of the volatility that's going on, I think keeping an eye on the signal versus the noise is quite important. And the thing in all of that volatility is to remember, I think, that we're in the middle or early stages of an energy transition, which is massive. It'll be the largest reallocation of capital in human history, just that trend. There's many other trends too, which means we need more metal. And I wasn't in the session yesterday on copper, but I heard a lot about that. I believe in that view.
I know you do.
But I think that we are short in a lot of these materials that we need to be able to make that trend, and we need to understand that. And that's irrespective of geopolitics. There is a shortage. And there's another issue, I think, about how we're valued as an industry and so forth, which I think we're undervalued. Obviously, I'm biased on that side, but I think there is a fundamental shortage, and that doesn't mean we won't have innovation and we won't have recycling and so forth. But when we think about that, the demand, China is the biggest market for most of the largest mining companies. It is and it will continue to be a significant demander of those resources, and urbanization is continuing to move. It's not anywhere near done. And the green transition, which is actually using a lot of steel to make wind turbines and to build the grids, is there. So that's there, but we also look at the other parts of the global south that will be growing. India will be moving forward. So, we have to deal with the geopolitics. I think we have to also understand, as I was reminded by a previous energy secretary and also commerce secretary, that you can get all excited about the China thing, but just remind yourself, you're not selling chips. We're selling iron ore, and we are selling some copper and aluminum and so forth. But let's just understand where the demand is going to have to be and how we move it. And we do have to think about supply chains in different ways because of the geopolitics that's going on. But I actually think that's going to exacerbate the supply-demand issue, because you're not going to have unified supply chains. And we're seeing that, sort of a Western supply chain and a China supply chain, if you will. So I think the key is that we just have to spend a lot of time with governments, with shareholders, making sure people understand what it is that we're trying to do. I do think it has implications for how we're organized. The comment that Mark Sidwell made about long-term patient capital, I think, is a very important one as well. So, and I think the other thing we should put in perspective, I do think we're in volatile times, but in this industry, Rio Tinto is 150 years old. And when you go back in history and look at what happened in various stages of that and what people did, there's actually quite a lot that can be learned from that too. So as I said, I'm a frightened optimist.
I like that.
And just on the topic of growth, there are a lot of commentators who are talking of the fracturing of globalization, the protectionism, actually impacting growth prospects, GDP growth, global growth prospects. Do you see that? And does it make the holy grail of growth that we were talking about even harder to achieve?
I think it does. I mean, I think it's what, again, Mark Sidwell talking about the cost of capital before. I do think the cost of capital is going up. I do think that deglobalization, I don't think globalization is going away. I think it's going to be different. I think it'll be a more regional, fragmented, but I don't see that going away. That will have an effect. But we shouldn't underestimate too there is a huge growing middle class in the world. A lot of that's in Asia and the global south, and innovation. If you think about the new businesses and industries that are going to be formed. So I think it's a tougher environment, but more in the medium to long term, I actually think there's lots of opportunities, but it will probably not be in all the opportunities that we've been focused on now. There'll be new areas that we'll need to focus on. So we'll have to adapt to it.
Yeah, it creates some friction, as you can imagine, but the overall scheme of things doesn't change that much.
And you like friction at Glencore, yeah. Venkat, so another trend moving away from globalization, you operate in West Africa solely.
Proudly.
What insights can you give to the audience on another current trend, which is the rising tide of resource nationalism? And just for the audience interest, the reason I asked particularly Venkat to talk about how do you deal with host governments in difficult scenarios is because there is an anecdote that when he was in a different role at in a different company, he literally camped in the office outside the minister day after day, and until they finally gave him a meeting because they wanted to get rid of him. So he is the person to tell you about how to deal with host governments.
But perhaps he can get me Wimbledon tickets then.
I wouldn't be able to deliver that one, Bernard. Thank you, Fiona. Firstly, I think there's a big difference between real risk and perceived risk. If I were to say to you, highly rated, credit-rated country, historical trade agreements torn and ripped apart overnight, turning their back on allies, a national rhetoric agenda, and a complete different view about foreigners. You know, certainly you can guess what I'm talking about, but it's not West Africa. Right? So the first thing we've got to understand here, in a mining, you're into the long-term game, and wherever you are, there would be uncertainty. The only thing certain about mining is uncertainty. And this is not for the faint-hearted. And I like your example about camping here, and it's true that you've got to be persistent, but fair in making your case, and the example you're giving, I think, is what happened in Ghana. I remember, and my former colleague Richard Duffy is here. With regard to West Africa, I think the reality, certainly in the area we operate in, is gold particularly is resource-rich in emerging markets. I'd love to get a mining license in the Federal Reserve Bank or the Bank of England, but they wouldn't give it to me. So we have got to go where the gold is. And West Africa is highly prospective, and as some of you may know and others may not, it's actually accounted for over 70 million ounces of reserves in the last sort of 15 years. The permitting timelines are much shorter. You can bring a project into fruition within a period of about 2.5, 3 years, and it's easy to get audience with people who are making decisions. You've got to articulate your case properly and also show respect and humility in that regard. Don't come banging with your checkbook as the capital. That doesn't go down well. It's how is it you can work in partnership. We have managed to bring, as a company, 5 projects into production from literally exploration sites, all on budget and within a 2-year time frame. And effectively ended up with 10 to 15-year mines. And we have managed to get the return to our shareholders and investment into the company, and at the same time, providing for returns to the government, balancing that equation properly to keep people happy. And I think that's an important aspect here. What is critical in handling the host governments is trust and partnership that is built over time. You build trust in droplets of water, you can lose it in buckets. You've got to bear that in mind. So it doesn't take much to lose trust when it comes to it. Transparent and proactive communication is another aspect here. Don't go and knock on a government's door when you've got a problem. Try and communicate and build that relationship over time, even during good times, to say this is where we are, this is the cash flow that's been generated, this is how the economic pie is shared. And I remember an example in Ghana where they had an issue in terms of fiscal connection. And we actually went out to the head of Inland Revenue at that time and said, is there a way we can help you? And he said, if you can pay our royalties in advance, that will go a long way, and we did. So they remember those things in that regard. So it's quite important that you have a fair and equitable allocation of the pie. And the most important aspect, which you've got to get right, is how you treat your employees and the local community, because they are the ambassadors in terms of actually getting what you want. And I can go back to the example in Ghana. It was the union and ourselves and the community that actually championed to the government to have that mine reopened back in time. And the minister said, when I've got the community, the employees, and the company coming together, there's nothing I can do. You've taken the decision away from my hands, and they gave us the approval. That's the meeting you're talking about in that regard. So I think there's an immense scope here, but it's got to be built over time. And you've got to be there, and through thick and thin. We have been through Ebola, we have been through COVID, but critical here, we've stood by it, stood by the stakeholders and the government longer term. That's quite critical.
Thank you. I hope you never camp outside my office, so yes. Guy Robert, we have not forgotten you. I'm going to bring you into the next topic where you have such an interesting perspective. So against these challenges, growth in a very uncertain world, how do you address, as chairman, optimal capital allocation, given the very long time horizons pertaining to investment in mining assets? Now, we have an author of 3 books here on our panel, Dominic, and in one of his books, Talent Wins, more of which later, you quote the findings of a study that showed that companies that reallocated financial capital aggressively from one division to another, based on market opportunity and performance, were worth 40% more after 15 years than those had been relatively passive. So my question to you is, could you please comment on the huge conundrum of balancing the often short-term focus of shareholders in listed mining companies with the long-term investment horizons required in allocating and reallocating capital in the mining industry? No. He's coming next.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You wrote the book.
You wrote the book.
You're probably one of 6 people that read that book, so I appreciate that.
Well, I did skim it, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think it is a challenge because you need to have a long lens and a short lens. I remember learning this from a former Minister of Finance in Canada, Jim Flaherty, and I asked him, what would you teach your 21-year-old self? He said, I'd learn to have a microscope in one eye and a telescope in the other and not get a headache. And I think you can't be one or the other. You need to be both. So I think you have to have and we are a long-term industry. We're thinking 20, 30, 40, 50 years in the time frames. So we have to, and all this volatility, have to be looking through what's happening. If I think about Resolution in Arizona, where we've been looking at that for well over a decade to see it as through many different governments and views, and we just have to keep the eye on what the opportunity is and where it is, and that will require capital to be able to drive that. So I think the one aspect is you've got to think about both at the same time. It's not one or just the other. But the second is, I think it's extremely important to prioritize when there's lots of opportunities that you have out there. Where is it that you want to focus? And then if you are seeing places where you're not getting the returns that you require, you need to move on that. And that can be very difficult in organizations because no one likes to give up capital. And I found that even when I was in McKinsey, we'd love to tell organizations to do that, but when we looked at the lens inside, no one wanted to do it internally. We like to tell other people what to do, but not do it ourselves, because no one wants to say, I need less, or I'm willing to give that up. But I think that's the role of leadership, particularly the CEO, is thinking about where is that capital best used, again, thinking short-term and long-term. And I do think there are ways to measure that. If you're over time not looking at sort of 5 to 7% of your capital being reallocated, there may be an issue that's moving. That doesn't mean you're flipping it about. The trading, I think, is fantastic in that dimension, but you do need to be more agile in terms of how you're moving that around to the right places over time.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm
like lithium. The lithium shift, yes.
Another example, I think, is Chile, right? If you think about Chile 30 years ago, people looked at when Escondida was first being built by BHP. It was the scariest place on earth. You couldn't get permits, you couldn't get trucks. And by the time Phelps Dodge, where I was at, we built Candelaria, it was considered a very risky investment. And we worked with the government to create Decree Law 600 to help the mining companies. 10 years later, it was like Chile is the greatest place to invest. And that kind of psychological change happens. But miners have to take that long-term risk and invest the capital to make things work.
And have to take the short-term shareholders with them, yes. So this is where I found it absolutely fascinating talking to Guy Robert, because his shareholders are the government. So, Guy, capital allocation in your job, what are the challenges there?
Yes. Thank you very much, Fiona, for the opportunity to talk about it. Let's say the weakness and the strengths of a state-owned company were not driven by quantities and return on equity. It's a chance because you can build a long-term strategy, but it's also a weakness because you have a risk of decapitalization. It means that your state can request you to get more money from them proud to invest in the capital of the company. But today, regarding the current endowment we have in the critical resources, we demonstrate, the leadership of the company demonstrate to the government they have to be patient and to let's allocate the money and the capital we can get on the exploration to disclose more exploration strategy, to provide more opportunity to our partner to increase the resource of cobalt, copper, lithium in the country. But secondly, to invest massively on the human capital, because today we know that one of the shortage we have on the ground is the human resource who can fit with the needs of the current mining sector. And the third one also is what some calls non-core business, but very critical for us, is some infrastructures and energy capacity. And the government understood it, and the government is easier when you have a shareholder as a government to invest in this kind of patiently on this kind of topics like human resource, infrastructures, energy, and also exploration, greenfield exploration. And now our challenge is not only to use the money, the capital we have within the company, but to team up also with companies, like some of you or companies there, to invite them and to come to unlock the potential we can have, and therefore we can jointly allocate capital to increase the resource available for the mining sector.
Yes. So I found this fascinating. You said it's really difficult sometimes because you want to invest in a new project and the government says, sorry, this year we've got a budget deficit actually.
Correct.
Yes. How do you manage those negotiations? How much power do you have against that budget deficit demand?
The way we manage it is when you demonstrate to them that you have a good project. For example, if I invite one of the company to say that regarding the current profile of the market in terms of cobalt, we need to increase the resource, and not necessarily the resource already held by our partnership, they can delay some requests. Today we are educating our shareholder to see that they need to have a long-term view of what's happening in the country. Our endowment today put DRC in the middle of the map today in terms of geopolitical strategy for certain countries in West and even in China. DRC is critical, and we explained to our government that we should be able to attract this FDI, this foreign direct investment in the country, and therefore the best way to do so is also to have a good balance sheet. The way we allocate the money could be attract investors rather to afraid them, be afraid of to invest with Gécamines. The last 2 years we spent our time to convince Western companies that the place to be is in DRC and the best partner to be in DRC is Gécamines. And we successfully attract a lot of companies in the country. When you see the number of billions of dollars invested for the last 2 years, it's simply impressive. And we convince the government that the best way today is not to decapitalize the company, otherwise the discussion we can have with our partner, we weaken ourselves. And they start to understand it. And is why also a company like Gecamines is involved in the peace discussion with the US, is because we can demonstrate that peace is very critical for us, it's critical for them, but also brings more stability, and they can invest and get more access to some critical minerals they're looking for.
Yes. Interesting perspective on capital allocation.
Fiona, if I may
Yes.
make a point on capital allocation, I think It's quite an important topic, but there are two things which doesn't get mentioned as part of it. Everybody debates about allocating capital, and I agree. If you only declare dividends to please the short-term shareholders, then effectively you become an annuity with no growth. If you only deliver growth, then effectively it's a promise for the future, and when will the show me the money argument comes in. So ideally, your pots to allocate would be your short-term dividends, your long-term growth, and then risk management, which is building a buffer for a rainy day, which is your balance sheet. The answer to this is basically productivity and costs. If you can focus on productivity and costs and put the efforts in there, that increases the amount of capital that is available, and it's perpetual capital. And a simple area would be the bottlenecks in the flow sheet in terms of production. If you just allocate the capital to say, hey, how do I release this particular bottleneck that gives you more for less? And I think that is the answer. And increasingly, you're seeing mining companies do that, but perhaps there's a lot more untapped capital out there which can be released from within the system.
He's just put McKinsey out of business. I mean,
Sorry?
summarize mining to the core.
Yes. And just before we leave the pure topic of capital allocation, do you think the Glencore ethos culture enables you to move quite rapidly in terms of where you're allocating capital? And you do take your shareholders with you? Because the very interesting thing to me was when Glencore consulted all their shareholders on whether they should hold the coal assets or not. And over 90% voted with the company view. So do you think Glencore's culture and the shareholders that you have enable you to be more entrepreneurial?
Yeah, that's part of our description of the company is entrepreneurship. But I think the coal example is very classic. If you go back to 2019, the pressure on all the companies was divest coal and you'll become a purer company. It had no impact on the environment, by the way, because the people that sold the coal went to coal companies who then expanded the coal production. So net, the loss for Earth, gain for the company, I guess. But Glencore took the view that, we're going to retain the coal and we're going to manage the decline of the coal because we can do it best in terms of how to wind it down over time in relationship to both the long-term mine life and economic outlook. So 2019, 2020, the reaction from shareholders, I see George sitting there, was not necessarily hugely supportive, but each year that we engaged with them, George, were you supportive? Okay. And each year that we talked to them, I think we had the big energy crisis in Europe where wind power died, solar power had some issues, and even Germany was starting to import coal suddenly just to keep the lights on. And those of you from South Africa know you suffer 6-7 hours of downtime. Neighboring countries, Zambia, et cetera, even worse. And that's a huge problem. And we still think that the wind down is the right strategy. And that's the reason we have such a large support from our shareholding base to retain the coal business. We acquired the metallurgical coal business from Teck last year, and that, of course, is critical for decarbonization in terms of steel production, which is a completely separate business. But we will continue to maintain our steam coal wind down as planned. And I think shareholders appreciate the fact that we've taken a position on a very long-term basis, and we're sticking to it as we go on.
So capital allocation is a huge debate within these companies, and it's a team effort. We don't expect that the chairman make the final decision. So I want to shift the discussion slightly and ask Venkat the next question. You, in your time, have been a finance director, then a CEO, and now a chairman. So talking about the chairman role, I guess, and who influences capital allocation, what insights can you offer on making a successful transition from one to another?
I think it's a good point, actually, and it's broader than capital allocation. It's how do you transition the roles. And some of you play cricket and some of you watch cricket, some of you know nothing about cricket, but you have to adapt to your style depending on the role you are. Is it a 5-day match, 1-day match, or a 20-20, or a 6-over match? I think as a finance director, your approach, your perspectives start to broaden as you go through the various stages. As a finance director, it tends to be largely myopic to begin with. You're focused in your area in terms of the balance sheet, in terms of getting the finances and the numbers right, and then you move to being a business partner. As a CEO, your lens is much broader in terms of strategy, in terms of actually execution, whether it's operational, capital execution, or the like, and also managing multiple stakeholder relationship. When you move to NED, you have to bear in mind that you're not the cook in the kitchen. That's quite important. And that transition has to happen. You are actually keeping your eyes in, nose in, but your hands behind your back. I think that's the critical thing when you are as an NED. And I remember one of my uncles asking me, what is your role as a director or a chairman in a company? And you could write, volumes about this, but I said to him, how am I going to explain to him? The answer is simple. You're here to do two things. One, to deliver value, sustainable value to all of your stakeholders, but importantly, do that within the guardrails of your value set. And I think that's important. When the transition happens, Fiona, I think if I can do it on 4 themes. Firstly, the time horizon changes. As a finance director, you basically look at a 3-year plan, 5-year plan, until the next refinancing, etc. As a CEO, you go much longer. As a NED or the chair, you go beyond the lifespan of the CEO. What happens? What is the company currently positioned beyond the current CEO and the next CEO? What are we trying to do? What is the North Star? So that's the first thing that changes. Secondly, you deal with far more abstract than tangible items, and you're forced to consider your second, third, fourth, nth order consequence, which actually has to be taken into account. There's less doing, but you gain the power of influence as you actually go through this. The ability to get work done through others by supporting them, by constructively challenging them, etc., is critical. The final thing that comes through, and I'm still learning that, by the way, you do far less talking and more listening as you go through these levels. And English is a wonderful language, by the way. I didn't realize that listen and silent have got exactly the same alphabets, put differently. So it's a practice, and it comes quite slowly. And that's the most difficult transition. The better you listen, the more silent you are. Often the most profound comments made at a board meeting are by the silent NEDs. When they start speaking, the entire boardroom listens.
Yes. Bob Wilson of Rio was famous for that. He would keep totally quiet, and the person would keep filling the silence and the gap and just keep talking. Yes.
And one last aspect would be, if anybody is looking at transition to an NED role, my recommendation or counsel would be start early. I'd strongly recommend any C-suite person to at least have one NED role, because it broadens your horizons. It will help you do your C job much, much better.
I would add one more thing. I get a lot of CEOs, former CEOs, who call and say, do you have any suggestions if I want to join a board? And my first comment to them is, park your ego. You're no longer the king.
Right.
You got to be a team player to be on a board, and that's incredibly important.
Correct.
So, thank you. This is moving to a topic that came up a lot when I chatted to the panelists before this session, and that is, yes, the world out there is challenging. We have to take into account what Mark's talked about, but equally of concern to all these chairmen is the internal aspects of the company, and mainly succession and talent. And back to that book of yours, Dominic.
God, you wish you hadn't written
I'll
it.
send you one. I'll send you a copy.
2 quick quotes.
I'll do it.
One is, you must manage human capital as wisely as financial capital. In both, deployment of assets is the way you win or lose. And secondly, board directors need to be steered from the traditional definition of TSR, total shareholder return, to a new one, talent, strategy, and risk. So could you outline the main theme in the book that relates to creating value through human capital management?
Yeah, I think the sort of the simple idea we were trying to push across was that we spend a lot of time thinking about capital allocation. We spend a lot of time thinking about the financial plans, the strategies, but often not much time is then spent thinking about the talent and who's going to do it. And to me, the epitome of the thinking of how to improve this is actually Steve Schwartzman at Blackstone, right, who would say, private equity's gone through different eras, leveraging up, performance improvement. And he was frustrated with the idea that you would do reams of analysis to sort of show we can improve the value of this company by 3 times, and this is where it is. But then it was like a 15-minute conversation on who should actually do it, or where was the value going to be driven in it. And so it's the notion of talent to value. And I think that's something that's I think more for the CEO, the CFO, and the CHRO to work on together. I don't think that's so much a board role, but maybe picking up on your 4 principles, I do think stepping back and saying, what is the depth of our talent, right? Are we growing leaders or not? Who is growing leaders in the organization and who is not? What type of talent do we actually need? I think the mining industry is going through a lot of change. And one thing we've actually all spoken about at times is we're worried about from the Western world, the universities that are generating the number of mining engineers, it's been decreasing significantly. The only place in the world where it's increasing and quite substantially is China on that front. So when you think about some of that, the talent that's coming in, but the talent's much more diverse. We need people that understand digital. We need people who understand climate and the implications of biodiversity and what's happening. So the breadth of talent. I'll go back to Bob Wilson. He was the first business person ever to hire anthropologists into a company. And the view was we need to have people actually understand what's going on in communities that we're working in, which was quite a provocative thing at the time. So I think this notion of what's the bench look like, the talent development look like, how are we thinking, how is the organization thinking about moving talent to where the opportunities are? And it's not often at the N-1, it might be at N-4, it might be in procurement, it might be in a mine build that you're doing in a particularly challenging part of the part of the world that you're operating in. So I think it's the notion again that talent's not just for the HR department. Talent is fundamental to being a good business leader and how you develop it and how you allocate it. So that was more the thinking. I think it's very relevant to what we do.
So that's easier said than done in the mining industry, because we all know that the mining industry has an image problem, especially with the younger generation. Mark Cutifani, I think, has referred to it as a grey tsunami. So let's move on to how do we address the image problem of the mining industry and how do we attract the new generation. So Guy Robert, in Africa, how does Gen Z of Africa view mining?
Yes, definitely, you're right that we have a challenge of to attract talents in the mining sector, particularly in DRC. And what we did when I started my chairmanship, I engaged directly with a company, a state-owned company in Morocco named OCP, because they develop a model where they create themselves the capacity to develop the talents within the company, to convince Moroccans who are living overseas to come back and to work for the state-owned company. The convert the company was just a bureaucratic one to one of the most effective, the most productive company in Africa, the phosphate. And we engaged with them. What we did, we identified some of our talent within the company, and we sent them to African Business School. It's a program of MBAs or some technical expertise with the support of Columbia Business School. And today, after 2 years, we have new talents, more motivated, and also spending time in other operations we convince them. We start to engage also with Kalidas company, Glencore, to see how we can identify some people from our companies to go to share some expertise and experience within some partnership we have with them, and to see whether we can improve them and to convince them. It's not only a matter of salary, it's a matter to be convinced that they can have a future. Regarding the cycle, because in DRC, we have several experience where not only the instability and the peace, but also the cycle of the commodity price. It's so easy to lose his job when the copper price is below $6,000 per ton. And people prefer to be in the bureaucracy or to work for telecoms, to work for banking, rather to go to the mining. We should convince them, first of all, that they can have a future. We have another sort of perception we have to work with. You have a lot of people who are working in the mining sector as mercenaries. They come for a project for 2-3 years, highly paid, and leave. And it's not easy to sedentarize capacity and expertise in the country. We're working hard with most of our partnership in DRC to develop also some joint, mutualize the effort to revamp some schools we have in DRC. Is why when people say that Gécamines have schools is a non-core business, today it become a kind of a core business because we have some schools and we can mutualize effort and put all of those $1 and $1 to convince, to revamp the company and to attract expertise in the country. That's the way we have to work on. It's not easy to convince people today, young people, to stay in remote area. We have to convince, we have to join effort with all the companies we have in DRC, Glencore being one of them, to utilize our effort and to build some schools, to share some expertise, some experience within our partnership and to keep people in. It's working now. It starts to work, but it's not enough. The shortage is very huge, and we have to address it over time.
But it's quite reassuring that there is no difference between Gen Z here and Gen Z in Africa. They're all, you said they're all impatient. No, 5 years is too long for a geology degree. No, we're all in a hurry.
And we raised them, so now we have to work with them.
Yes. So thank you. Venkat, what are your ideas for attracting the next generation of leaders into the mining sector, especially given the wider range of skills that's likely to be required?
I think an issue recognized is 50% of the issue resolved, and I think it's fair that there is a talent aspect and attraction aspect, but here again, to make a subtle difference, there's a difference between the two hemispheres. You certainly see universities which specialize in mining either not having enough intake, shutting down, etc., more in the northern hemisphere, but as our experience certainly in West Africa and the university there is, we have a huge inflow of people applying for these courses and wanting the jobs, and we have unfortunately got to turn some of them away. We absorb as many as we can in Burkina Faso, in Cote d'Ivoire, and in Senegal at our operations. But what is perhaps needs to happen is more the transfer of the expertise from some of the more seasoned mining colleagues in the Western Hemisphere or Northern Hemisphere coming over to the younger talent is perhaps one bridge that needs to be addressed quickly. Secondly, I think we need to change our narrative as far as the mining is concerned, because the younger generation has very much the purpose in mind. I can see the CEO of ICMM here. It's very much purpose-driven. It's around equity, social equity, around climate change. What is it you're contributing to critical infrastructure? If we can actually position mining industry as something which is helping us sustain the world, providing the critical infrastructure needed, and helping us with energy transition, that would be one way of actually pulling the younger generation in. Technology is a big factor. People don't have patience. They want immediate results at the end of the end of their phone, and when you have these kids coming in for your interview, they are interviewing you. You're not interviewing them. They want to know what's your flexible working arrangements, how many days you want us in the office, etc. Whereas if it's technology driven, there are instances where you can operate fleets remotely. So positioning mining industry as something which is using technology to basically solve needs will be a big pull. Importantly, we've got to catch the youngsters young, and that's at school. We all remember career days when people used to come and say, I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer, I'm an accountant, I'm a lawyer. How many of us have had people come in and say, hey, I'm a mining engineer, and I'm actually a process engineer or a geologist? And I think that has to change. And when you really look at it, the youngsters want to travel. They want to see the world. They want to learn experiences. They want to experience different walks of life. They want multiple jobs within a short period of time. Mining industry offers everything to them. When you're actually running a mine, you're running the entire infrastructure, hospitals, schools, the irrigation system, the environmental system, the whole lot. So the way you actually sell it to youngsters, catching them young, would make a huge difference. So I'm quite optimistic there.
Video you.
Sorry?
Wouldn't look good on video.
I would also add diversity is pretty important. You know, there's a lot of talk about diversity, but the issue around diversity is that the gene pool that comes into mining is fairly small. And for us, therefore, to have a much wider net is much more important. That's why you'll see in today's Glencore, we have a lot more women in technical jobs, in senior leadership roles. Our board is 50% women now. And it's not because we're trying to solve to a mathematical number, because that's never the Glencore way. We're trying to find the right qualified people, bring them up at the entry level, and then work them in their careers to match their lifestyle, their career, to what our objectives are. And that's pretty important. I think as we go forward as industry, emphasizing that and being multicultural is incredibly important.
Well, I can't really let the session go without doing some stirring and being devil's advocate. So, the industry can do its best to highlight the good it does and the importance of its products and all of that, but the reality is that we live in an increasingly dangerous world. And of necessity, all sorts of organizations are required to spend more time, focus, and money on keeping staff and assets safe, including universities. So the elephant in the room here for miners, in my view, remains the ubiquitous and very complex challenges from illegal mining or garam paras, and how you deal with that without this image of military security, firing on people, etc. So a quick one thought, each of you, on a strategy to acknowledge and manage this growing issue of illegal mining in a way that's both positive for the industry's image and the communities that surround its mining sites. Let's start with Guy. Guy.
Yes. My concern today is a matter of, as Venkat said at the beginning, is a matter of perception. It's really a matter of perception, because today when we talk about the concern we have on the ground, we are working today in DRC about peace. And we are quite convinced that the peace we are trying to achieve with the support of US and Qatar can help us to change the perception of the jurisdiction like in DRC and others. And to be honest with ourselves, when you see the investment have been developed the last 30 years while we have the war, we can say that it's still a jurisdiction where people can invest. The next step today is to go to unlock the rest of the potential and to attract more stable investment. Today we can say, yes, we have a lot of military activities in the country. We are far of it, and I want to avoid the word of resource nationalism. I'm not sure that is a matter of resource nationalism. I'm more focused on rebalancing the creation of value. That's the key topic we have today when we discuss about jurisdiction like DRC.
Yeah.
We are perceived as a country who have a lot of tension. We are perceived a country who have a kind of stability. We're working hard to convince people to bring more stability and peace.
Right.
But
Yes.
today, the biggest challenge is today how we can create value. We don't want to keep all. We want to convince people to come in, to invest, and to create value, productivity, more jobs locally in the country.
To see it safer. Yes. Thank you. Just one thought from the three of you. Kalidas?
Look, I think there are two aspects to it. So one, from a customer base, you know, you talk to the Teslas and the BMWs, what they want is a value chain of products. Take cobalt, for example, where they want to assure from the source all the way to them, there is no artisanal mining, child labor, et cetera, involved. So companies like ours spend an enormous amount of time making sure that we can assure it. We do third-party audits. We make sure that every single pound of cobalt is associated for. Second, we work with the government and with somebody like the Ferro-Cobalt Alliance to try and create a system by which these miners can work at some government-approved places that can create the economic welfare that they need. Because the basis of all this is economics, and to make it as safe as possible, et cetera. So those are the two aspects of how to deal with it. There isn't a simple solution that makes it all go away, but you have to deal with each of the issues separately.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I fully agree to add to what Kalidas said. I think it's also about standards and transparency. Those would be the two words. And I think about, Ro, what the industry is doing, because it's in our collective interest. We need everyone to behave to the highest standards, because we will be hammered if someone doesn't. So I think maintaining standards like we've done with tailings and other areas, I think is critical. And then the transparency, and this is, I personally find this awkward or painful at times, having NGOs that actually will challenge you. And sometimes it's not fun sometimes because they can be unpleasant, but I think they actually play a role to push and look for where things are. So having the standards and then having that transparency, I think is very important, because those activities damage the reputation.
I'm going to come back to you on that.
Fiona, this is very topical when it comes to gold mining, as you know. So firstly, we've got to draw a distinction between illegal mining and artisanal small-scale mining. It's quite important you have the distinction here. And if I can talk at the kind of industry level, and I can see Tom here from the World Gold Council. The World Gold Council has started an initiative which is basically effectively bringing in integrity, trust, and transparency. I'm not sure if David touched upon this yesterday, but basically where every bar of gold is logged through a blockchain technology using a system into a ledger run by Accedrus, so that you can track the gold bar from origin until the very end. At the mine level, for example, at Endeavour, we have embraced something called single mine origin, where our gold from a particular mine is batch processed all the way to the end destination. So that in terms of ensuring integrity on the supply chain. But on the production front, I think a coexistence model has to be worked out by the industry, where small-scale mining is supported along with large-scale mining. That would involve an element of transferring some of the areas that the large-scale miners have over to the small-scale miners with the geological data to help them. But importantly, the government has to play an important part in regulating it properly so that it's responsibly done. And importantly, dealing with intermediaries here who actually take out a large chunk of the aspects which you see which cause the hardship. But the collective responsibility of both the mining companies and the government is, hey, what are you doing about creating alternative sources of employment which people can actually benefit from, which relies initially on the mine, but subsequently can stand alone on its own?
Yeah, yeah. So
I want just to add one word on it, about the ISM. Today, when I see the experience we had in DRC the last 5 years, two things appears First of all, and particularly for the critical minerals like cobalt and treaties. First of all, we have to bring peace, as I told you at the beginning, and the peace we can cut the ties between people who are feeding them and reduce. Yes, we should have an approach where we consider that they can have a future, but we know that the future of other miners is short. Normally, the law set up a framework where they say that they should have access to some geological mineralization with very shallow. And normally the activity should disappear. What we scared about today, we saw that we have some people, some forces, we saw some forces coming and start to invest in equipment who make things very difficult to address. The law is no longer enough. The needs of cobalt, for example, brings people to bring more equipment on the side, more equipment, and the country and companies is no longer easier only for companies to address it, even state-owned companies. The government should take another rules, but the concern is the way you can engage with this kind of mix of artisan miners and some smugglers surrounding them and organizing this activity start to be very challenging.
Yeah.
Our strategy was to say first, we have to bring peace. As soon as you keep peace, you can cut ties between traffic, smuggling, and arson, reduce for 50% exposure. The second step of remaining exposure, we decide as a government, not Gécamines, but the government decide to organize the ban and the quota of export of coal. Mechanically, you can no longer have people who are just using ISM to feed the plant to export. And progressively, the activity on ISM become non-productive. But it doesn't address the concern of the local, the peasant working around. We should build an alternative livelihood. And this one, our companies, our joint partner companies, cannot afford all the duties related to find an alternative livelihood. It becomes very challenging. And when you had a lot of bashing generated by NGOs, it makes things very difficult because it's not easy to say to people the alternative livelihood is to stop to find gold or to find cotton and to start agriculture. Agriculture have a cycle where you have to seed first, and then after you have a crop, it can take 6 months, 1 year. People say, you came from far to invest in our gold. We have this experience with Venkatakrishnan. We shared this experience a couple of years ago in Italy, when we said to people, guys, we have alternative rules. We set up a program with USAID. We bring some international NGOs, and the people respond us bluntly. You came from so far for gold, and you say to us that gold is not good for us, but agriculture. Please invest in agriculture because you consider it as a good livelihood. Let us continue our gold. It was not easy to convince people to leave the whole and to go to the agriculture.
Yes.
We should find some also quick wins for them within the strategy of livelihood.
That's what we look forward to hearing next year. You will come back and you say how you've developed. Yes. The very last one. Yeah. This is so completely out of the blue. I think I saw one panel leader bringing this in. No pre-warning here. It's an unexpected zone from an unexpected direction. One, yes or no, really, yes or no. The mining sector, as much as it captures all our attention, is still tiny in terms of market cap. You could hold it in your hand, and the gold sector even smaller in comparison to the huge tech sector. So, is seeking size for size's sake ever justified? given the very tiny market cap of the entire mining industry versus the tech sector? Is seeking size for size's sake ever justified? Kalidas.
I'll start. You know, our DNA is M&A, and we'll continue to do that. Absolutely.
You know, I think the important phrase in there is size for size's sake.
Yeah, that
no.
part. Yeah.
No.
Value is important.
If the question had been, is size important without the word for size sake, I would have said yes.
Yeah.
But since size sake is there, the answer is no. You never do it for the sake of size.
And I don't think it quite applies because you don't have a listed market cap, Guy Robert, but yes,
But they're looking to grow.
but they're looking to, yes.
We're just looking for more partner, and the value of our partnership to have more value.
Okay.
Fiona, I've got so many questions, so we're going to
Sorry,
run.
Bernard, just one point. Fiona, remember, these things go through cycles as well. And at one stage, I remember the market cap of our company was collectively more than all of the automotive manufacturers in the US put
Yes,
together
yes.
in 2008.
Yeah,
So
and-
these
and-
things can go through the
And in
cycle.
2000, they wrote off completely the old economy, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I also think that, you know, when I bought Tenke Fungurume from Freeport and North Parks from Rio Tinto, and all the Brazilian business from Anglo-American, from Mark Cutifani, everybody said I overpaid for it. That company now is worth 25 billion. So I think net we paid about 3 billion or so. So I think you have to be really careful about saying M&A doesn't work. In an industry where the high quality assets are very limited, making very good strategic decisions on high quality assets becomes very important.
There's a question which I think applies to certainly all three chairs on the panel here is managing succession. I think you all have had to do that recently or are doing that. So I suppose the question, without saying it, refers to CEO selection or very senior selection. Perhaps some wisdom. Can I start with you? Some wisdom around the process of succession.
I think 3 parts to it. As a board, you need to have an emergency succession plan, which you have to trigger within 24 hours notice. That's item 1. Secondly, developing internal successors, homegrown talent, is quite important. They may be successful in taking the role, but you want to make sure that they give the external participant a freaking good run for their money if they're not going to get it. And thirdly, always mapping good successive external candidates on your radar screen is quite important. But plan well ahead of time, but spend enough time at the board at the end of every meeting talking about 2 successions. Chair succession, CEO succession. That should be front and center on the agenda. And if you keep it in every agenda, it's a matter of routine. People take that into account. But if you don't plan in advance, you could be caught out.
Yeah, the thing I would emphasize is it's something to be thinking about all the time, that point. I think I learned this from Chevron. When they pick a new CEO, there's an immediate succession process that started. And it's not meant to be because there is the notion of the plan B if someone gets hit by a truck or wins the lottery, whatever phrase you want to say it. But it's that you are continually looking at it. And for us, it's not every board meeting, but we had an outside firm helping us actually look at this, and we'll continue to do that even after we do our succession, because it's important to be thinking about it, and that sort of deep dives with the CEO involved, by the way, and we do the same with the chair. So both looked at rigorously, because then you're aware of what's happening with talent development, and you're also aware of what's happening outside, and who is available and who isn't. So I think it's...
At Glencore, I sleep well. We have a deep pool of talent. We review it every year. Nothing that I worry about.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I'm just skipping you for the moment on this, but the next question I will do a quick round again on, if that's okay. What is the single global trend that you can pull out of the noise? So we heard about the noise, and then there are. So perhaps I can start with you online. So from where your perspective, what is the single global trend that you are picking out of all the noise of the moment, but briefly so, please.
The main trend I'm thinking today is people are now ready to invest in the greenfields. That's new because the last time, and also West woke up. It was time to West to wake up and to see that they have to invest in critical minerals rather to be just waiting for someone to deliver for them.
Thank you. Can I come from your side, Kalidas?
You know, I think the new trend is the old trend. If you look at the grades of assets for the last 30 years, they've constantly been decreasing. So the amount of replacement materials needed actually accelerates going forward. And then on top of that, you layer AI demand for electrical computing systems, et cetera. The demand for fundamentally for metals is going to increase at a rapid pace, and replacing that in a depleting world is going to be extremely important. So I think the fact that many governments are waking up to calling everything critical minerals, I think that'll continue, and the pressure will increase to find new resources.
Yeah, I think there's actually a number of 5. I won't go through them all, but of these macro trends that are the signal through that are there. You can't. Nothing's going to change it. Even geopolitics, it's there. But the one I sort of focus on of those 5 is technology, and it's the digitization and the combination of AI and how that's applied to our industry. I think we're in very early stages of being able to apply that, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. I'm excited by that.
If I come to you, often we lose the expertise of our panel chairs by making them panel chairs. Fiona, if you distill the one sort of trend out of the noise, what would that be?
It is the involvement of government in the mining sector. I've never seen it in my long career, and I think I did raise the question, is this going to lead to the hugest misallocation of capital ever seen?
That's what governments tend to do, of course.
They tend to do, yes, but at the moment, the trend is increasingly upwards of all governments getting involved, and let's see where that goes.
Yeah, I think Churchill said that governments always do the right thing once they've exhausted all of the positives.
Indeed. I want to come to you, Venkat.
Bernard, if I can highlight 2. I think firstly, the power base is shifting. The powers, economic powers as we know now, are not going to be the same in 20, 30 years' time. We are seeing the growth economies change completely. So that's one trend which you can see, which you can segregate from the noise. The second one is very much what Dominic actually said, is around AI and use of technology. That keeps me awake at night. I think it's a huge opportunity. AI is not going to replace jobs, but it's going to replace people who do not embrace it early enough in that process. And I think there's a huge opportunity there. If you were to deal with it properly and embrace it up front, I think it makes a big difference. What worries me is, how are we going to navigate the social impact or that is likely to bring to the rest of the population? I think that's quite an important one. It's going to change the way education is looked at. It's going to change the way we operate. All of that is going to change, and you just have to manage that very, very carefully.
Venkat, if I can perhaps put the next question to you. So I think on many boards now, there's a lot of discussions about risks and threats. Perhaps a few comments on cybersecurity. So we talk about new technology, but we haven't even caught up with the previous technology's threat. So you want to share a few thoughts on the board's role when it comes to cybersecurity?
I think it's quite an important area which you've got to keep aware of. I think there are 2 aspects to it. Firstly, to ensure that your IT and your OT systems are foolproof to the extent they can be, which is ensuring that you invest, the management team invests in the right technology, the right people, et cetera, to protect it and to have the checks and balance. Second area for me is, importantly, training. You've got to ensure that people are trained to detect sort of potential actors who can infiltrate your system, and that's quite important. And at the board level, you need to be sending phishing emails just to ensure that people are aware of it. Finally, the biggest challenge comes is when there is actually a cyber threat and it actually attacks you. And I think the simulation of how you deal with it is quite important. I think people spend a lot of time on the first two, but not on let's simulate it. And having been on the board of a company which was hit with cybersecurity, you wouldn't believe they went back to the old days of yellow stickies and papers to process customer orders. And that was not simulated, but once it was simulated, people knew the good old ways did hold good at that.
And also thinking through all the way to what bribe are you prepared to pay in which currency. That's where these things always end. Dominic, can I perhaps test, so certainly where we sit in African countries, we read that suddenly US companies must be allowed to bribe again in Africa, or that's what the executive order sounds like. Diversity and DEI.
That's you saying that, not me.
DEI, no, I'm not putting it to you as an American company. DEI and ESG are no longer favorable trends. But surely, as a chair of a company, you cannot blow with the whims of a new regime. Surely the DNA of a company takes you in a direction regardless of what the president says anywhere in the world, even in an important jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent, I agree with you. I think that, and I'm actually encouraged by listening to other resource company leaders on that side, including in the United States, from Exxon and others that are, we've got, because we're thinking long term, exactly. So you just need to be prepared that 15 years from now, someone's going to look back and say, you guys did that then? I feel that strongly. And so even if I take the DEI and we talked about it, and I totally agree with what Kalidas said, we believe we have a long way to go. I think BHP is ahead of us on that front in terms of what they've done. But it's not because it's a tick box thing to do. It actually, it's for shareholder value. We will be a better performing company if we have, to use that as well too, the diversity. So that's how we just have, I think you do have, there is a DNA, there's a license to operate. We have to have a license to operate that lasts for decades. So one needs to be very careful about shortcuts because they'll come back to haunt you. And I think we're all living with that in our organizations. I don't speak for others from things that have happened in the past, and you may not have been involved, but you need to own it. So I totally agree.
And I was actually, one question I didn't get to ask, which is, Tesh is going to stand up here and say how you've got to improve standards and ESG and all of that. But does it hold back the Western companies in competing in an increasingly competitive world for assets compared to the people who are not held to those standards?
That's a good question. Can we close off with Kalidas perhaps answering that? Can I put your question to him, and then we'll wrap up?
I think you got to be really careful to change your standards just because you think it's going to make you more competitive. We're playing the long game, and to do anything short term that says we're going to change our standards, our values, is totally wrong. And so, as an organization, we wouldn't support it at all.
Our industry are being led by very wise people. It's not only men, but this panel was mostly men. I go out of this conversation really in awe of good leadership at the top of our industry in very difficult times. Gentlemen and Fiona, I really appreciate your input, your frankness, and your preparedness to face the challenges on our behalf. Thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona.